You're about to know my favorite counters to the King's Gambit. The King's Gambit arises from the King's pawn move, and then they strike in the middle of the board with pawn to f4. Back in the day, it was actually one of the main ways for white to play, and the top world's players, Morphy, Anderssen, and the rest actually played this over and over again. Nowadays, of course, it's less popular on the top level, but in blitz, even top guys, Nepomniachtchi, Nakamura, Carlsen, play that sometimes, and on amateur level, it's extremely popular. Now, here's the problem. You gotta deal with this attack somehow. And if you just want to play passively, kind of playing casual moves such as knight to c6, pawn to d6, you simply allow them this powerful attack. They're going to castle kingside, and after that they're going to add their rook to this attack. They're putting pressure all around, and you allow them this strong attack against you without trying to challenge them in any way, and that's not really a good option. On the other hand, if you want to go down the rabbit hole of the main line and accept the gambit, then it can go nuts real quick. I've opened the Leech's database to show you one of the main lines of the King's Gambit because you wouldn't believe me otherwise, it's so crazy. Let's say we just choose the most played moves by black, we capture on f4, after that white goes knight f3, and the top choice of black, as well as the move suggested by Stockfish, is pawn g5. Here white goes bishop c4, pawn g4, but white just goes nuts and simply allows you to grab this knight on f3. After that they play queen takes, and now they line up against this pawn on f7, so they want to kind of do something similar to the scholars made, but in a more improved and advanced version. Black naturally tries to play queen f6, trying to oppose their own queen, but then white plays e5. White keeps sacrificing and giving up material after queen takes e5. They don't stop here. The main move is bishop takes f7. They just keep giving up stuff. After king takes, pawn d4. It looks like white is completely going crazy. Like they don't know what they're doing, but in fact it's one of the main lines. Queen takes d4, now bishop to e3. Quite a fancy move. It can be captured by the queen, but in fact that would be a blunder because this pawn is pinned down to the king, therefore the pawn from f4 can never move. Therefore black has to move the queen away, and they naturally want to somehow cover their king, so they move it back to f6, and yeah, you guessed it right, white is not going to care about this bishop. Instead, they play knight to c3. Threatening knight to d5 or maybe knight to e4, they still want to drive your queen away and then checkmate your king. So the top move of black is pawn c6, but this time the knight can go here and hit the queen. And if black still tries to maintain their presence on the f-file, white can win with this stunning move pawn g4. And now though black could capture en passant, that would drop the queen, and if the queen just moves somewhere, then after queen takes f4, white just accomplished their mission, they got to the king and they're winning the game. So if you don't want to cooperate in one of those beautiful miniatures, unfortunately on the losing side, you gotta know how to deal with the King's Gambit. And I want to be honest with you, even though I'm a grandmaster, for a long time I did not feel comfortable facing the King's Gambit, even when someone lower rated played this against me, because I knew that it doesn't really feel good to dive into all these complex theories and study them. On the other hand, I don't want to appear under a massive attack while my opponent probably is better prepared. So I wanted to find something simple but effective, and here's what I found. Initially, we accept the gambit, because usually the best way to refute the gambit is actually to accept it. Now white has to prove that they have something for the sacrificed pawn and exposed king. Initially, we're threatening queen h4 check, and they're probably going to play knight f3. In the vast majority of the cases they do. And here is the move that we're going to play with the 2 exclamation marks. Knight to e7. Now, it looks weird at first, but there are a number of advantages to this move. First off, we just drive away from the main line so that you don't have to study a ton of theory, but the move actually makes a lot of sense. There are 2 main ideas behind this move. First off, we're going to play pawn d5, strike in the center, and after white trades there, our knight is going to return back to the normal position and we will not obstruct the rest of our pieces. So that's one idea behind this move. And the other idea is that in many lines, then I can actually go to g6, and from there, it's going to guard this pawn on f4, not letting white to get it back easily. So that is also pretty cool. Now, the question you may have is why to develop the knight to e7 and not simply to f6 if you want to break open the center with pawn d5? And the answer is, after knight f6, you have to deal with e5, and now the knight has to go. If it goes somewhere here, or it can go knight c3, for example, then they open the game, they have this quick development, and that's what they want. And that's what we don't want. That's the reason why we play this a little bit awkward looking move knight to e7, but again, it's not awkward, it makes a lot of sense. Now, in this position, in most cases, your opponents are going to either play bishop c4, trying to prepare this attack, or pawn to d4, trying to build up the center and later grab this pawn by their bishop. In both cases, quite often it will transpose actually into the same thing. So let's start with the move pawn d4. Looks like it makes perfect sense. White grabs the center and they're getting ready to get back their sacrificed pawn. If they do this successfully, they'll indeed have a beautiful position. But of course, we're not going to let it happen. Now we strike in the center with pawn d5, as expected. Now we attack this pawn, they got to do something about that. they can usually either take or push, and we'll talk about both these options. So we'll start from taking on d5. Now we recapture with a knight, and not only we unblocked the bishop and the queen, but also the knight from here actually guards the pawn on f4. And in many of these variations, it's not just the extra pawn that we have, but it also obstructs their development. Like this bishop, as you can see, just can't go out because this square is controlled by us as well as this one. So they could only develop the bishop to d2, but that doesn't make much sense. It doesn't do really anything. Now, in this position, there is also a really nice trap that we can set along the way. It feels really nice for white to play pawn c4, kick out this knight, and then grab the annoying pawn and just enjoy life. And so a lot of your opponents will play this. If I'm not mistaken, that is the most played move in this position. But that is already a losing error. Just think about this. Right at the 6th move of the game, we are obtaining a winning position. And I know somebody in comments will say that it only works against complete putzers, but hey, in this game, there was some putzer by the name of Carlsen M from Norway who played this in 2023, and he got trapped, and actually lost to Andrew 10, who's rated only 2500. I mean, only compared to Magnus Carlsen. So, black goes here, bishop b4. Quite a nice in-between check, and we'll see why in a moment. Now, white needs to cover their king somehow. They can't do it with the knight, because then we just take it. We attack it twice. So we'll take, and then after this we take again, and then we win the rook. So that's clearly bad for white. They can't go here. But instead, they certainly can cover on d2 somehow, let's say with the bishop. But here is the trick. Now the bishop no longer guards the square e3, because it has to cover the king. And now our knight can jump forward to e3, to this really juicy square. Like, there's the octopus name for a knight if you can fix it on the third rank of your opponent. Because from here, it really completely dominates over the position, and it paralyzes your opponent completely, as well as attacks everything around. But the very first thing they gotta do is to deal with this attack against their king. Also, once again, they can't take this knight because the bishop is pinned down to the king. Therefore, they have to move the queen away. But the first thing that comes to their mind is, hey, how about queen a4 check? I'm actually not only getting out of the attack, but I'm coming up with this double attack. But then you say, okay, go ahead. You play bishop d7, and you let them capture the bishop, because after that, we end up with this royal fork, and we win the game. Even if they notice this, for now, it's too late for white to repair their position. Because even if they don't take right here on b4, but just try to go back, their position is ruined. We still have this monstrous knight on e3. They can't castle, they can't develop normally, etc. Plus, we can still humiliate them. We can not even trade the bishop, but just guard it. And after they trade, now we threaten knight to c2, forking the king and rook, but if they take it, once again they fall for the same royal fork with knight to c2, winning the queen, and this is a very bad devastation. Your opponents may also play bishop to c4 at some point. They may either play d4 first and then bishop c4, or they may start from bishop c4, it doesn't matter. Let's say they go d4 first, we strike in the center with d5, and after they trade, let's say they don't fall for our trap with pawn to c4, but instead play bishop c4. What do you want to do next? Well, then, the move that I recommend is bishop to e6. A very tricky move. At first, it looks like you just wanted to solidify your position, guard this knight. But in reality, it also sets some nice traps along the way. And the problem for white in all these positions is that they're down a pawn, plus this is an annoying pawn on f4 that does not let them develop this knight properly. Therefore, they need to somehow find a way to get back this pawn just to equalize, and that's really a very annoying part for white. They're fighting for equality and they can't generate any attack, which was the initial purpose of playing the King's Gambit. Anyway, bishop e6 also comes up with some tactical ideas behind it. For example, if they play lightheartedly knight to c3, that would be a big blunder, because now, after knight takes c3, it turns out that not only we trade knights, but it's also a discovered attack to their bishop. So they're gonna just lose it on the next move, ending up with a totally losing position. The most common move for white is just to castle kingside, but that also fails to a similar tactical idea. Just this time we play knight to e3, which attacks here a lot of pieces as well as the bishop, but also once again opens up this discovered attack against the bishop. And that's how you win some material. Now normally they need to grab the knight, and that's what they'll do in most of the cases, and that's pretty bad. So because if they take it, you just take here on c4, and now they end up with this double attack, so they can't save both of their pieces. If they take on f4, you just grab the rook, and now you're up material. You can play bishop d6, trade bishops, you can castle, and you just enjoy extra material and a winning position. How else can your opponent try to escape from this quick defeat? Well, some of them actually played queen e2, which is a big blunder, because now you just grab this bishop and you attack everything along this diagonal, and that is completely devastating. So they shouldn't go there. even though some will. Bishop b5 check is the move recommended by computer, but after c6 they still have to deal with this double attack, so they got a trade on e3, and now yeah, they avoided losing a lot of material, but still you have this extra pawn on e3, and there is a really annoying for white way to reinforce this pawn. Since we expect that white will try to get it back, you can play g6, and after queen e2, all of a sudden not only you develop your bishop, but you actually hold on to this extra pawn, making it not easy for white to get it back, and it's right in the middle of their position, so again, you have a huge advantage here. Alright, so how can white try to do anything against you? We already know that knight c3 as well as castling fails to various discovered attacks against this bishop. What if they just try to eliminate this annoying knight and then grab the pawn on f4? Then you can recapture with a queen, bringing your queen into play, and also maybe you even want to play knight c6 and castle queenside, kind of like in the Scandinavian game where your rook becomes active along the d-file and you start attacking this pawn. Now also, if they capture this pawn on f4, that's actually another little trap along the way, because after queen e4, thanks to this double attack, we're gonna win the bishop. Also, just to take this back, to clarify, if they ever play knight c3, we're not worried about this, because, I mean, you could move your queen away, but in this position you don't even need to, because you can play bishop b4, develop your bishop, and also pin the knight down to the king. Later on, if necessary, you can trade off, and your queen feels good. Now, there's also one more variation that we gotta cover. After knight to e7, when you're planning to go pawn to d5, if they go d4 and d5, what if they don't take here, but instead they push forward? Like, quite often white does that in similar positions. Then you can reroute this knight to g6. And from here, we also guard this pawn, still not in lamb cap trade. And that again feels annoying for white. Now, what can they do now? If they ever try to play pawn h4, trying to play h5 and kick it away, you can just play h5. Quite a standard thing. Also, that provides this nice g4 square for your bishop, and generally speaking, h4 weakens their king side, because they're probably going to castle there at some point, and this pawn is going to be weak. You can play bishop e7 and also attack it twice. Therefore, h4, h5 does not really change the situation all that much, and it rather weakens white's position than yours. So, in most cases, they're going to play bishop to d3, just trying to develop, and maybe they still want at some point to take and to grab this pawn on f4. What do you do here? Well, fundamentally, you just want to develop. So we're going to play bishop e7, bishop g4, castle, and attack their center with something like this. I understand I've drawn a lot of errors, don't worry, it's going to be simple. So we can play c5. The thing is, they have to spend some time just to get back their sacrificed pawn, which looks quite foolish, because they initially deliberately sacrificed the pawn, and now they have to put all this hard effort just to get it back. Anyway, during this time, we're going to attack on the other side of the board, in the center. So we play c5. Now, they never really want to take here, because that would only help you to develop your bishop and prevent them from castling, another problem. So they don't want to do that. If they do, great for you. Instead, maybe they wish to just trade on g6 and finally get back this pawn on f4. And fair enough, they got it back, but the downside of this is that now you're already putting strong pressure to their center. Also, you have this h-file for your rook, which is quite handy. Finally, they had to give up their light square bishop, which is typically one of the main attacking forces of white. They typically wish to develop it somewhere to c4, put pressure down here, but now we can see that all of that has been in the past, so none of that is real. So, right now they need to defend this pawn somehow. We're putting pressure. If they play pawn c3, trying to defend it, we can go bishop g4, developing our bishop, and also pinning the knight, therefore making it even harder for them to guard this pawn on d4. Anyway, they gotta do something. Let's say they castle, and now you can actually trade there and play queen b6, adding one more attack to this weak pawn, and now white already has no real option to defend it, because we can always trade the knight here for a bishop and then take on d4. Plus, from b6, our queen also hits the pawn on b2, and then later the rook. So it's really difficult for white to cope with all these threats. And there is also one really beautiful tactics. If they go knight c3 trying to somehow counterattack, you can ignore that completely and play the beautiful move knight takes d4. Now, really cool. White thought that this pawn is defended, but you still take it there. Now, what's the point? They can't move the knight because that would expose their queen. But how about queen takes d4? Does that win the knight for white? Not really, because after bishop c5, we actually win their queen thanks to this pin. Now, really unusual and beautiful tactics. By the way, these are very common variations. And what if white decides to bite the bullet and just go down this rabbit hole of complications? They want to counterattack your queen. If the queen moves, maybe they want to play knight to c7, forking your king and rook. We're going to ignore that and play knight takes f3, which is a counterattack. A check to the king, and as well as the discover check and a double check. You can't really ask anything greater from just a single move. Now the king has to move, and now still the situation remains to be tensed, And we're not gonna back down. We're playing knight takes h2, which exposes also a counterattack to their queen. Plus, if they really try to grab our queen here on b6, we don't even need their queen. We can play knight f3, and all of a sudden our rook from h8 wins the game. So that's quite nice, that the rook that seemed to be doing nothing during the entire game, ultimately they can delay one move, but that's nevertheless the checkmate. Of course, chess is not just knowing openings. If you want to know 2 simple actionable ideas that instantly elevate your chess strength, check out this video. And if you want to know a more comprehensive positional guide to improve your chess strategy, then head to this free masterclass up there. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.